All right, greetings and salutations. I'm going to be sharing with you just a little bit of a peek into my process for composing music. This is not going to be an exhaustive treatise on note by note by note analysis of what I do, but I want to give you a feel of the process that I go through when I'm composing a piece of music. Today we're going to be looking at an SATB, soprano, alto, tenor, baritone, choral composition that I'm beginning to start on based on starting on the text. Come unto me, all ye that are weary, and I will give you rest. I'm going to show you how I begin that process, and maybe there's something in here for you. But again, I'm not going to be doing a note-by-note analysis. I'm just going to do it and walk you through my process, and hopefully there'll be something here for you. All right? Stand by. Let's get started. Greetings and salutations. Welcome to another episode of The Emerging Composer. I'm thinking today I'm just going to share the process I go through when I have to come up with an original melody for a choral piece, how to harmonize 4 parts. I'm going to do my best to give you an insight into my process, how I do this. This isn't hard. It isn't difficult, but does require some knowledge of music theory in order to pull this off. So I'm not going to spin my wheels covering every minute detail of what I'm doing, but I'm going to give you the overall bird's eye view, if you will, of the process I go through. Let's say I'm going to write a choral piece, a sacred piece, and I'm going to start with the phrase, "Come unto me, all ye who are weary." And of course, the corresponding phrase after that, "and I will give you rest." So what I do is I write out, first of all, the lyrics, "Come unto me, all ye who are weary." And I just start with, I'm in the key of C, no sharps, no flats, so to make life really easy. And I just basically use whole notes and half notes about how I want this this phrase to go. And I put them all on the note C, like you see here. "Come unto me, all ye who are weary." That's what I got. So now what I do is I'm going to modify that. Now I'm going to start building my skips and leaps and steps and whatever, and come up with a melodic direction for this. And this is what I did. I start at the end, the C at the end. Hear that? So now what I do is I can approach that last note from a half step below or from a whole step above. I like to approach it from a half step below. It gives a sense of finality to it. But you know what? Just pay close attention, because you're going to find out that I might change things up down the road a little bit. Not telling you too much ahead, but just know that what I do is I start this process. And when I begin this, there's no inspiration. I don't have any idea what I'm going to do with this melody. I'm just going to do some mechanical things that I always do. And then at some point in the process, I start hearing how the voices and notes are going to flow one to the other. And then I start going from what's my intuition, it's like my muse comes off the porch to play with me. Right now, I'm trying to convince my muse to come off the porch and play with me. So I'm just going to go through some basic mechanical steps. And this is a very simple thing that when you're writing a cantus firmus, you approach the last note from a half step below or a whole step above. I chose a half step below. And I like the process of just, if I go from a half step below, then that word we're, the note that precedes it, the word are, I can pick any note from a third above this B or a third below this B. I picked a third above, and this is what you're going to hear. Very classic ending. All right, then what I do is I start working from this D on this measure. It says R, and I'm going to work back to the beginning, the word come, and I'm going to obey the laws of skipping and stepping. And basically it's this. If you skip up, you step down. If you step down, you skip up. Now already I'm breaking a rule here, but I'm going to fix it later. Because you see I skipped down from the D to the B. But I chose this note A because I like the way it sounds. And so I skipped up and I skipped down. We'll address that in a bit. And then I just continued to finish moving backwards toward the C. I skipped up here in the second measure. I stepped up, boom, boom, and I skipped down. And we end up with, here we are. Now, I kind of like the way that sounds. So now what I do is I apply what I call a rhythm map to it. Come unto me, all ye who are weary. All right, come. And that ends up going here. Now, you notice up here I had weary going from a B to a C. But look what I've got going on here. I have an E to a D. And here's why. See if you can figure out what I did here. This phrase is not the end of the statement. So I don't want to end on the tonic. Tonic is C. So I don't want to end on bottom. Don't want to. I want to end on something that's going to propel it forward. So what I do, this is in the key of C. What is a chord that propels you forward in any key? That's always going to be the dominant chord. In this case, it would be a G. So I need to pick a chord tone from the G chord, a G, B, or D. So that's what I did. I went here. It's at this point where all of a sudden I start hearing how this is going to flow and how this is going to go. And now this comes from just years of experience of listening and playing. So this is going to be basically a G chord at the end of this measure, on this measure. And then I'm going to go back to the tonic, C. And I'm going to finish the statement off. I will give you rest. All right, so let's hear what that sounds like. Oops, sorry. Here we are. All right. I will give you rest. And again, I'm kind of ending it on a G, a 5, because I'm not done yet. So let's see what I do next. All right, the next thing I do now is I'm going to add a second part to this. What I did is I actually ended up starting with putting in the tenor voice next. All right. I start on the same note. Notice how they both start on a C. Here's a C. And I try to do my second voice to move counter to the first voice whenever possible. And if it has to move in consonant with the voice, I try to use thirds and sixths because those notes are just the prettiest. All right? And you notice what I did here. They both start on a C. And where the top note goes, the top part, soprano, I'm doing. Now, the top note, it's an A. Well, in the key of C, what chords have an A in it? Well, that would be an F, maybe a D minor, maybe an A minor. I chose to keep it as simple as possible, F. So I put an F here. Now, look what I did with the alto was the third voice I did. So the first chord of this progression is going to be what? A C, right? A C chord because it's in the key of C. Makes sense. So I gave the alto an E. The next chord, the next note, we have a B and an E between the tenor and the soprano. So I gave the alto a G. Makes sense. We're going to make this like an E minor chord. That makes sense. That's one of our chords. And the last note of this measure, we have an F at the top. Tenor has an A. I give the alto the C. Make it an F chord. And it's also an F chord on the second measure. Because I had the soprano ends up on an A. I put the tenor at an F. So that means the alto is going to get the C. So I'm going to use these three voices primarily to voice my triad as much as possible. And I'm going to do something different with the bass. Here, in the bass, we know the first chord's a C, so I start them on a C. Next chord's going to be an E minor, right? Didn't I say that? E, G, B. And I put a G down here in the bass. So you could call this an E minor with a G in the bass, or it could be a G6 chord. Doesn't matter. I went up to a G, and then I just had the bass basically walk his way down to get to the C in the third measure, which is going to be our C major chord. And here's what that's going to sound like all together so far. Here we go. All right. And now I'm going to keep on going using that same process. My soprano and my tenor voice is the voices I did first, and they gave me the outline. The soprano, third measure, has a G, and the tenor has a D. All right, a G, a D. I put an F in the alto, so it's like it's a G7, but without a B in it. But that sounds pretty cool. You're going to hear if I keep with the bass voice being a C. Now, at this point, as I'm moving on, I'm making logical decisions based on what I know of intervals and what sounds sweet and what doesn't. I'm keeping it as simple, triadic voicings as possible because I want it pure. I want it clean. I want it just sweet and easy to listen to. But at the same time, as I'm doing these things, I'm keeping a couple things in mind. One, counter motion as often as possible. Two, try to have some kind of opposing motion. If other voices are moving, this voice stays still. In this case, I had the soprano, alto, and tenor pretty much in the same, identically, the same rhythmic patterns, right? It's like a chorale. But I took the basses, and when the chorale, soprano, alto, tenor are staying still, I have the basses move. And when the other voices are moving, I have the bass stay still. So, as you can see here, I'm getting from C, and the very end of this is going to be a G chord, a G7, because what comes after this next is going to come back to C and start my next section. So let's just give this thing a listen so far and see what I've got. That's how I get from one point to the other. I start off with a very mechanical, formulaic approach to figuring out a melody, laying out my basic framework, if you will, of the melody in the soprano voice. And then I use the same formulaic stuff that I learned in my counterpoint classes to write my second part, and I'm almost always put my second part. If my primary melody is soprano, I like to put my second voice in the tenor, my counterpoint voice, if you will. And then I use the alto and the bass to fill in the gaps and trying to keep it interesting so that I'm just not throwing garbage notes at them. This is where the art of writing comes in. You can't, at some point, you have to put the mechanical stuff away and go with your heart. That's the only way I can describe it. As I was starting to write this, I started with a very mechanical melody to me. And as it began to progress, I began to hear what my heart was telling me where these voices needed to go. And by the time I got done with the tenor voice in the second part, I started adding the alto and the bass parts. All of a sudden, it's like I heard it in my head what I was supposed to do. And yes, I'm using my music theory knowledge, to find for notes that are cool. And I have a reason for every note I've written. I can break it down to you, and it would take an awful lot of time, perhaps. But I just want to show you that composing can be fun. I had no idea what I was going to do when I started this morning. This was just an exercise this morning. And I think I've got the beginning of something that could be something. I hope that makes sense. You need a process that allows you to get started. I was talking with a composing friend of mine on another podcast I did with him. And he said he discovered that his secret for inspiration was to go to work. He said, every day I show up in my studio and I sit down and I write something. I write something, he says. I do the work. I get started. And he says at some point, the light comes on. That's how he put it. The light comes on. Now, he's a Christian, so he says also, it's like the Spirit of God just kind of takes over and the music starts to flow. I like that. I'm a Christian too. I get that. When I went to get my master's degree in composition, it was my goal of that master's degree, and the point of my thesis was what do I do when I don't know what to do? How do I get my muse to come off the porch and play with me? For me, the answer was learn the mechanics of writing contrapuntal two parts, a melody and a counterpoint melody. Learn the art of doing that. Learn the mechanics of doing that. And then as I start doing that, at some point in the process, I start hearing where the voices are going to go. I know that sounds kind of Zen-like, but that's what happens. And it happens every time. This is a product of about an hour's work. Now, this is not done. I've got lots of things that I could take and turn this into and work into this. And then when I get all the notes in place, then I've got to go back and deal with dynamics and phrasing and things of that nature. But the point is, this is my process. I start with the mechanical process of writing a cantus firmus, and then writing a legitimate contrapuntal part, a counterpoint part in the second voice. And then those two voices together will give me the clue as to the chordal movement. And that's when I start to manipulate this and fill in the other parts. So let's listen to it. Listen to what I started with. This is the melody that I ended up with. Now here is all four voices. Cool. Now, watch what happens. I'm going to mute the alto and the bass at first. Alto and the baritone, I should say. And this is what I did when I had just the soprano and the tenor. Cool. Now what I did is I added the alto. And again, you notice how in a chorale type fashion, the soprano, alto, and tenor have the same rhythmic structure. So I made the bass to move rhythmically against it. And here's the adding the bass or the baritone part. Again, listen to how when the soprano, alto, tenor stop, the bass moves. Now, what I could easily do, is I could walk the bass down here. So let me do that. All right. And there I am. Oops. There we are. Now, let's bring these measures up onto one line here. Pardon me for a second. There we are. All right, so now you notice how when the other voices are static are in place, the bass moves. So let's listen to it all again. There you go. Now, you can see I can have all sorts of fun with this, and by the time I'm done with this, it'll probably be changed even more. But now as I listen to it, I'm starting to hear things, and I might fix things. Now, from a singing standpoint, this would be a very easy piece to sing. The basses are moving primarily in stepwise motion. There's a skips. Going from C to G is not hard. And then I have the C. I have to skip up to the E. And the rest of it is just stepwise movement. So there's no incredibly high parts for the soprano. There's no incredible leaps. Everything is easy to sing. And that's my goal. All right. So let me just wrap this up here for a second and just say that, where are we here? Where's my record button? There we are. Oh, there we are. Does that make sense? Cool. All right. Well, I'll probably come back to this in a day or two and do something more with it, and I'll give you insight and look into it. But this is just, in a nutshell, this is kind of what I do when I have the time in my hands. All right, this is Mr. G. I'm out of here. Bye-bye.